Earl, you gotta do a favor, just close the door.
Sure.
The air won't stay on for too long. Thank you. Okay, so we got a little late head start. I apologize. We're right in the middle of something here. I don't remember exactly where on this page we got up to, so we'll start again from page 793. Just the.
I haven't said 24 yet.
Oh, we got all the way to 24 ER?
That's where my little check mark is, yeah.
I don't think so.
I
I think we're in the middle here. Okay, I wasn't here last week.
Right. You were, I think we're in the middle of this page somewhere, right? We'll start again with 793. We'll just review and go over it quickly. Basically, these chapters, we're trying to figure out what does it mean that there's Shekhinah, that God rests in a certain place. God is present in this world in a certain place, and perhaps more in one place than others. Excuse me. For example, it says in the temple, or as we'll see in the future chapters. I already made a bracha, so. So we said in order to understand God, well, we can't really understand God, but in order to get an understanding of what God wants us to understand about him, we can get a glimpse, we can get some sort of metaphor if we look at ourselves, because we're created in the image of God. So if we think about our body and soul and the way they relate, so on the one hand, we have the way Kabbalah usually references 248 limbs in the body. Each one is unique, has a unique purpose and a unique role. And the soul that's manifest into each unique limb is different, right? The energy that the soul puts into the eyes is different than the energy the soul puts in to the nose. They perform different tasks, different energy. But we obviously understand that we can't say that there's 248 different parts of the soul, as if the soul is a puzzle of 248 pieces. And if one of the pieces is missing, then a part of the soul is missing, or one of those pieces can only go because it's a soul. And we know that okay, so here's sort of where we're holding. Okay, so let's read this inside, and then we'll continue from here. 793. So where would we be? Yeah, but I'm looking for Roger. Let's see. Okay, we're going to start again from here. Now the variation. Okay. But we'll end up, we'll go through quickly, we'll end up where you're holding. Now the variation in receiving the functional powers and life force by the organs of the body from the soul, each organ receiving from the soul a life force and power in a different form, right? Because it has a different function. So the fact that each limb receives its life force from the soul does not derive from the soul's essence and being. That we should say that its being in essence is divided into 248 different parts. In other words, when my eyes see with the power of the soul, they're not seeing with the essence of the soul. They're seeing with an extension of the soul that goes into the eye. Because you can't say that now the eye has 248th of the soul in it, which are enclosed in 248 locations, as if we're dividing the soul into different parts, according to the design of the various locations of the body's organs. We gave the example last time, I don't know if you remember, we gave the example of like a seed that you plant. So every potential outcome that will come from the seed is already in the seed. But when you look at the seed, you don't see all of those different parts in the seed. Or an idea, when you have an initial idea, so the way the idea plays out, you don't necessarily have all those details. You don't see all those details in the idea, as if you could say the idea is divided into different parts. But in potential, all those ideas exist in all of those practical outcomes exist in the idea itself.
Could you say that, I'm not equating this, but think of an example of a chromosome. Okay, because the chromosome, takes into effect all the different parts. And then each DNA strand is designated to do a certain job and to initiate certain functions in different parts. But they're all contained in one chromosome.
No, but that's already one step further down, because there you could see, if you look close enough, you could see how it's as if the chromosome is made up of 248 puzzle pieces, right?
But not really, because you don't know exactly which one.
What do you mean you don't know? Why don't you know that?
The DNA, they're only made up of 4 or 5 different, different proteins, but it's the combination that they're put into, and that specific combination designates can grow.
Okay, so you have to, maybe afterwards you can explain to me a little more
Okay.
what it is, how exactly it works. I know the general way it works, and then I'll be able to, because obviously I'm seeing.
This is
No. It could be very similar. I actually was thinking, because I don't know much about it, it's hard for me to. I don't know much about stem cells, but from what I understand, and it could be this is exactly that. From what I understand, it's more micro than DNA. In other words, it's sort of the source of the DNA, and therefore from the stem cell you can create any part of the body, any limb or any function of the body, potentially at least. The
stem cell is amorphous, right? And so it's like the beginnings, but they're all in this.
Very good. So that's a perfect example. Yeah. And by the way, the same way for, say, thousands or billions, it doesn't matter, till recently, no one realized that there was this not particle, because it is a particle, but sub-detectable entity called stem cell, whatever the name is for it. Beneath that, there's even more refined layer, which is the soul. In other words, the soul that can't be detected by the physical eye, but we know exists. Just like today, it's obvious that there's these molecular and submolecular buildings that exist that you can't see when you look at a specific thing. The fact that there's a soul is also, to the person who studies Torah, the person who understands how the world was created, or knows that the world was created, God created the world with something from nothing, understands there must be something beneath. We just can't see it yet, or we can't see it, period. But at least our mind's eye sees and knows that it has to be there, and we need to look for it or figure out how to find it. Okay, because according to this, it would follow that if we say that the soul itself is enclosed in your eyes and in your ears and in your nose, etc., and it's like 248 puzzle pieces, because according to this, it would follow that the soul's essence and being is designed in a physical design and a likeness and structure similar to the structure of a body, God forbid. Just as the organs of the body have various shapes and forms, so according to this outlook, are the functional powers, while still within the soul, different from each other in form. But again, we cannot accept this. But we can't accept that in the soul itself, there's different categories. Rather, is the soul entirely a single spiritual entity. It is a single entity and a spiritual entity. As a single entity, its oneness is plain and uncompounded. As a spiritual entity, its spirituality is in the form which is divested of any physical design and of any type of definition of physical space, measure, or limitation. This soul, knows the essence of the soul, is free of all such dimensions by virtue of its intrinsic being and essence. In fact, the soul is so plain and free of all these that even when it is actually enclosed within the organs, they cannot affect any change in the soul. So when you get to what did you call it? The neurons, not neurons.
DNA.
Yeah, but
The chromosome.
the chromosome. Is that the another name for, or the definition of the stem cell?
No, that's I'm not sure.
Okay, fine.
I have to research that a little bit myself.
Do you know?
It's one of the measuring sticks on DNA.
So it's one step more advanced than.
Right, right,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's the
DNA
most what's the earliest thing we have a name for?
RNA?
Chromosomes, which is a bunch of individual pieces of
Yes.
DNA connected to each other. And so each cell, which I guess they started as stem cells, I don't understand. They all have all the chromosomes in them. I think.
So, but there are identifiable chromosomes in each. Okay, so we have to get, in other words, there is, if you get a microscope and you can look deeper, there is that place where all of these are undistinguishable. That starting point, that first molecule, where all the DNA strands are included, the first human, right? All our DNA, two parents have a child, and it's a totally new DNA, but that DNA in potential is already included in the father and mother's DNA, even though it's non-distinguishable and it's unidentifiable as a unique DNA. The same thing, every human being's DNA is included in Adam, right? That's why we had this class last week. There is no such thing as a gold human being and a copper human being and a silver human being. All our DNA comes from the same place. So Jew, Gentile, man, woman, giant or midget, or young and old, smart or not. So there is that earliest point where everything is included in potential in that first, whatever you want to call it, molecule, chromosome, whatever, DNA strand. Therefore, the Alter Rebbe continues, and it is not valid to say concerning the soul's being in essence that it is in the brain of the head more than in the feet, since its being in essence is not subject to the concept of dimension of physical space and limitation. It is therefore impossible to attribute to the soul this limitation of being more in the head than in the feet, because then you're limiting it to physical space. And like Saul always says, his doctors never saw a soul on an MRI, right? If it was limited to the head and not to the feet, you'd see a difference in the MRI between the head and the feet, but it's not. Rather, 613 kinds of functional powers and vital forces are included within the soul, within its being in essence, to become actualized and to emerge from this concealment and inclusion within the soul's essence. In other words, previously, while still included within the soul's essence, they are only in potentia, and therefore hidden within the soul, not even as functional powers, which are revealed as such while still included within the soul. In other words, within the soul is concealed a potential for 613 functional powers to become actualized and to emerge from concealment. Okay, let's just finish the last paragraph. And then, in order to animate the 248 organs and 365 blood vessels of the body through the functional powers of the divine soul, becoming enclosed within the animating or vital soul, which also possesses the corresponding 248 and 365 functional powers and vital forces, which correspond to the 248 positive mitzvahs and the 365 negative mitzvahs. All of these relate to the soul, the body, the human being, the structure, the world, etc. You think about it, the difference between this phone with nothing on it or this phone right now that has a lot of things on it. Right now, every app and word and letter and number and picture that's in this phone is hidden, right? It's in the phone itself. Yeah. If I turn it on and play it, you could hear it in a different place. You could see it in a different place. I could send it to you. But right now, it's all hidden within the phone. But you're not going to, but in the phone, there are actually, all of those pictures and words are actually in the phone, right? You may not be able to see it, but it's in there. So if you were to go inside the phone with a microscopic tool and scratch one surface of the phone's memory, you would actually erase or actually corrupt some of that information. However, if this phone had nothing on it, it only has the potential of every type of color in the world and every type of sound in the world and every formation and formulation you could think of in potential. You wouldn't say that the phone itself has all of that within it because it doesn't have any of it yet, but potentially has all of it in it, and therefore any picture can be stored on this phone. And by the way, if we can figure out musical note or a color that hasn't been known to the developers, that musical note and that color would not be able to be on this phone, right? In other words, if you could figure out something from a different source, if you'd be able to create something from a different source, it wouldn't be on this phone. The same thing, not the same thing, but as an analogy, we could see the same thing with the soul. The soul, the way its powers are actually expressed, is not present within the soul itself. What we're going to call the soul itself, its most essential, boiled down essence. But the soul has the power. And therefore, when the soul invests itself in your eyes, it sees. But if that same soul energy invested in your ears wouldn't see, even though it's the power to see. But if it invests in the ears, it's not going to see. But, okay, so that's that's the one side of the coin where we see that the soul is definitely tailored to the body, but only in the way the soul is expressed, not in the essence of the soul. Okay. So we have two sides. On the one hand, we have that the soul has one essence that's the same in the head and in the feet. But remember, last week we discussed at great length how the soul is different in the head and the feet, right? The soul in the head is felt differently than the soul in the feet. When the feet hurt or get it takes a second for the message to be sent to the brain. In other words, it seems like the soul is mainly in the brain and not in the feet. And yet we're saying today that it's everywhere equally. But yet we understand that even though it's everywhere equally, it's not, right? We say all humans are created equal, but not, what's the saying? Some are created more equal than others, right? So we do understand that although the soul is everywhere, it is present first and foremost in the brain, in the mind. Where do we see this? So we see this it expresses itself in a number of areas practically where you see it sometimes even literally. First of all, the brain is the first part of the body that functions. Before a child can see, can speak, the brain is already starting to function, even though we may not know exactly what its functions are, but we know the brain is functioning before all the other parts of the body start to function. And the truth is that really everything is included in the mind, in the brain, because I think we mentioned this last week, that the ability to see is already a potential power in the brain before your eyes can see. And that's why someone who can't see imagines things in their brain in different ways, using maybe their hearing, but using their touch, their smell, their hearing, using their other senses, they're formulating a vision in their brain. Again, it doesn't look like the physical vision because they don't have, assuming they never saw anything before and they didn't become blind, but they're visualizing something in their brain, right? Because the brain has the power to envision. The brain has the power to speak. And if a person's mouth doesn't work, it figures out other ways, whether through hand motions, through writing. That's the power of speech. Even if you can't hear it, that's speech. In other words, it's the power of expression, expressing something, right, to someone else. So we see also here that even though the soul is present in all limbs, first and foremost, its primary functions are felt in the brain before they're felt in the actual limbs that express those powers in the body. And then the brain tells the body to function in those ways. And that's why you can have someone that we discussed at the beginning of Tanya. This was sort of the premise. The whole building was built on this, that the mind controls even the heart. right? So a person can really want to look at something, but he's told it's a surprise or whatever. Don't open your eyes. And you, no matter how strong you want to, you have the power because your brain controls your eyes. You are capable of keeping your eyes closed for longer than you feel safe or longer than you feel whatever. If you want, if you use your brain, you can control that. We had a story, I told you the story then in chapter 12 when we introduced this concept of the Alter Rebbe's chassid, or Moshe Velenker, who the Alter Rebbe at the end of his life, it was during the Napoleon War against Russia, and the Rebbe wanted the Tsar to win, although it would be bad for the Jews materially. Russia wasn't promising equal rights and things for Jews, but spiritually, France would be a disaster for Yiddishkeit. That liberalism that was being championed then, and Alter Rebbe, one of Alter Rebbe's chassidim, Moshe Velenke, was very fluent in both Russian and French, got into Napoleon's inner circle as a translator to translate secret communications and things like that. And at a certain point, Napoleon realized he has a traitor in his midst. And he suspected Moshe of being the spy. So one day he barged into the room, unexpected, and he yelled, "You traitor!" And he went over to Moshe and right away put his hand on his pulse or his heart to see if his heart was beating faster. If he was really a spy, he would be a little dysregulated, and he wasn't. And so Napoleon let off of him and left him alone. He was asked later, "How did you do it?" How did you do that? It's a miracle. He says, not a miracle. The Rebbe taught us in Tanya that the mind controls the heart. And he took it to its logical conclusion that this is for real. Yeah. However, it is we do need to address, the Rebbe is going to address that this is the biggest leap we have to make. The fact that the brain controls every limb of every part of the body, every function of the body that we get. But the heart seems to have a function that is almost equal, if not superior, to the brain. It provides blood to the rest of the body. Without the heart, the brain doesn't function, right? When the brain is starved of oxygen, of the blood flow, the brain dies too. Yeah, the brain could die. And sometimes even before, or at least today we know there's still some function in the brain, but the brain can seem to die before the heart dies. Yeah. So how could the brain control the heart? It would seem to be the other way around. Yeah. So the Alter Rebbe is going to address this, that even though it expresses itself that the heart has this power, but ultimately, as Alter Rebbe taught us in chapter 12, and as related in this story, we see that the brain ultimately does control the heart, and the heart can stop pumping and can raise its beat and lower its beat through the direction of the brain of the mind. Okay, so let's see. 796, yeah? Now, concerning the flow of all the 613 kinds of functional powers and vital forces, which are drawn from the concealment of the soul, where they are previously hidden, and from where they are now drawn to the body to animate it. Remember, when we say hidden, we don't mean hidden that they were hiding there. We mean they were there in potential, right? They weren't. Concerning this flow, the sages have said that the principal dwelling place and abode of this flow and revelation, once the soul starts flowing into the body in an active way, where does it start? Where's the principal resting place of the soul of the previously concealed powers and forces? Is entirely situated in the brains of the head. Now, that's where the soul is. From there, it emanates to the rest of the body. Therefore, it is the brains. When we say brains, we're talking here about the three levels in intellect, Chachma, Bina, and Das, which may correspond to the three parts of the brain. That's irrelevant. He's not referring to three brains, the flesh, the material of the brain. He's talking about the brain powers, three brain powers that we've been talking about in Tanya for the last 50 chapters. Therefore, it is the brains, which first receive the power and life force appropriate to them, according to their composition and character. Namely, intellect, which is divided into the three intellectual faculties called Chabad, Chachma, Bina, and Das, and the faculty of thought and whatever pertains to the brain. All these receive their life force from the soul before the other parts of the body. And not only this, that the brains receive their own life force before the other organs, but also the overall flow of all the individual streams of vitality to the other organs is also first included and enclosed in the brains of the head. Before it becomes revealed in the individual organs. Like we said, the power of sight, the ability to communicate or to envision exists in the brain before it actually goes to the power of speech or to the power of sight, physical sight. And it is there in the brain that the core and source of the said flow exists in a form in which the light and vitality of the entire soul are revealed. In other words, when the general flow of vitality reaches the brain, then the light and vitality of the entire body begin to be revealed. But in the brain, the beginning of the brain, so to speak, the soul is there not in a revealed way. In other words, not in a way that's divided or that seems to be have different separate powers. And from there, the brain radiance flows to all the other organs, each of which then receives the functional power and vital force appropriate to it according to its composition and character. The power of sight is revealed in the eye, the power of hearing in the ear, and so on. But all functional powers flow from the brain, as is known. For there, the brain is located, in the brain is located the principal dwelling place of the entire soul in a revealed form. Since there in the brain, the overall life force which flows from the soul is revealed, it is only the individual faculties of the overall life force which shine forth and radiate from the brain to all other organs of the body, just as light radiates and shines from the sun into the innermost of rooms. And now he includes even the heart, which is a central organ from which all other organs receive vitality. The heart diffuses to all organs, as we discussed in chapter 1 of Tanya. So even the heart receives its own vital force from the brain, which is why the brain naturally dominates the heart, as explained above. So again, we're trying to, the question we opened up the chapter with was, how do we understand the fact that God is everywhere, and yet he's in certain places more than others? In 25 here, in a minute, we're going to start seeing the analog. There's the analogy, and then there's the analog. We're going to talk about this the way it is in God and the way God manifests in the world. But in the analogy, we're seeing this in the soul, that in the soul we all recognize, again, no one has ever seen the soul before physically, but we all recognize that we have some sort of life force that sustains us. We all recognize that life force, that soul, comes in different ways into the eyes, nose, ears, mouth, etc. And yet we all understand, especially now with the advancement of DNA, we see even physically this exists. How much more so when we're talking spiritually, that even though what we can see is different puzzle pieces, we all understand that in their source, in their nucleus, in the DNA, it's all really one and the same, as the same entity that only has the potential for all these different variations, doesn't actually have these variations included in their unique form, and therefore comprising a part of the essence of the soul, right?
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Before that, do we need to explain, is this all understood? Whether you agree with it or not, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
So the only thing I was thinking about, everything sort of emanates, from the brain. When we talk about death, and I don't know if that's included here, there's brain dead, or if the heart is dead and the brain is still going, where does Chabad or Judaism say that when a person is died? Is it the brain dead, or is it the heart that ceases to function?
So it's not so relevant to the topic here.
Sorry.
Well, no, it's relevant. In other words, because why? Why is it relevant? It's relevant.
You're saying the soul,
The Torah is the blueprint for the world. So the way God describes mind and heart in God divine levels is the way we're created in the image of God. We're created in the same way. So Kabbalah should inform halacha, but it doesn't always. And I'll tell you why. There are 70 ways of understanding what we see in the Torah. Every human being is different. So unless it's something that's clearly written into the Torah, it's up for discussion. And although in Kabbalah, generally speaking, there's a singular path, but there are different opinions in Kabbalah. There are different variations of different things in Kabbalah. So just because something is true in Kabbalah doesn't necessarily mean it will be that way in Halacha. So much so that actually, when it comes to Jewish law, there are differences sometimes between the Talmudists and the Kabbalists. Kabbalists will do things differently than the Talmudists, assuming it's not clearly written in the Torah, assuming it's not clearly in the Talmud the other way. So, for example, it doesn't say in the Talmud if you should wear your tzitzit on top of your clothing or under your clothing. It doesn't say. It says you should wear tzitzit. It doesn't even say in the Torah you have to wear tzitzit. It says if you have a four-corner garment, you wear tzitzit. Yeah?
Mhm.
We want to always do a mitzvah. We want to be constantly surrounded with mitzvahs. So we choose to always wear tzitzit. It says you should see them, right? That's what the verse says. You should see it and remember all the commandments. Which part of the mitzvah should you see? Strings, the whole garment. So you have different fields. Pure halacha, wear it covered. You don't have to physically see it. It's wearing it that when you say the words, you see it. There were many Kabbalists that wore, until today, a lot of Kabbalists wear their tzitzit out on top of their clothing. And they make sure to wear their clothing open. Even if they wear a jacket, they'll wear it open so that you can see the tzitzit. And what happens when you close the jacket? You put on a tallis, right? In Chabad, we have a middle ground. We cover the tzitzit, but we leave the strings open. That's sort of the middle ground, okay? But there are certain things that if you look at in the Code of Jewish Law, you'll notice those commentaries, those codifiers that studied Kabbalah will have different customs or different applications of certain halachas, certain laws, because from the light of Kabbalah, this is the way it would seem to do it. But based on the Talmud, based on the text, because the Talmud is textual, because halacha is textual, based on the text, it seems something else should be done. So what do you do when there's okay? So
Ask your rabbi.
well, exactly. So similarly speaking, when it comes to brain death or heart, the heart dying first. So when we say the medicine disagrees with the Torah, that can't be. Okay, because the Torah is the reality. So if medicine disagrees with the Torah, either you don't understand Torah or medicine hasn't yet uncovered the deepest truth. Okay, and a good example, this is brain death. For many years, the medical community claimed that brain death can happen before the heart dies. Okay, and that's why someone who's brain dead, doctors will take out their heart, and we don't put them in prison for murder, right? The Torah, again, this is halacha, not Kabbalah. Halacha says that if the heart is beating, the person's alive. We know this because the Talmud says that if a building falls on a person on Shabbos and moving the rocks to uncover the person is desecrating the Shabbos, if there's a possibility the guy's alive, which you don't know until you see him dead, if there's a possibility the guy's alive, you do whatever you need to move the building. And then if you uncover his face, so it depends. If he's dead, you got to stop right there. You got to wait till after Shabbos to continue. But if he's alive, even if he's going to die in a minute, you could see but he's still alive, then you continue uncovering until he's dead or until you save him, until you rescue him. How do you know if he's alive? Yeah, the Talmud speaking to rabbis in the shul. How are you going to know if he's alive? So the Talmud says, put a feather or something by his nose, and you see if he's breathing. That's the way to tell. So when it comes halachically, that's what we have to go on. Okay? That's how we as humans can measure life or death. The medical community claimed that a person can be alive, can be dead with their heart breathing, right? Because the heart's beating, the brain's dead, and we call that death. How do you square that with the way the Torah? So you could say two things. One is we have no way of measuring brain death, at least in the time of the Talmud. So the only way to tell us if someone's dead is by measuring the breath. That's as far as we can go. Yeah. Or we can say, wait 50 years. You know why the doctors say the brain is really dead? Because they wanted to perform heart surgeries. They wanted to get human hearts. The only way to get a human heart ethically is by claiming that the person's dead. Today, we know that even someone who's brain dead, there is movement in the brain. Perhaps not movement that we consider valuable or meaningful, but there is no such thing as full brain death. If there's full brain death, the heart isn't beating. If the brain is truly dead, the heart isn't pumping. Okay, so today we know that how the doctors, the more clear this becomes, how the doctors are going to square and continue doing open heart replacements or any other type of body replacements that need life in order to be usable, that they'll square away somehow. Maybe they'll wait till they figure out how to do it from animals or stem cells, and then they won't need the procedure, and then they'll reveal the truth that they knew all along or whatever, that the brain death isn't really brain death. But so halachically, that's the way we do it. There are halachic authorities that do rely on brain death, and it's not simple. What I just said now is not to be used halachically, but it definitely is informed by Kabbalah. Kabbalah shows us the DNA, the blueprint of how it works, and again, sometimes because it doesn't say clearly in the Torah and the Talmud, we can't base halacha off of it, off of Kabbalah, but it definitely does give us insight into how the world works.
That was just, and so I was just trying to bring a point here to, it says even the heart, receives from the brain, which is
The Torah would assume that there is no such thing as brain death without, and the heart still beating. Today we know medically that's the case. But for many years, the medical field claimed that not to be the case. And then everyone came and said, contradiction, Torah contradicts medical science. Torah doesn't contradict medical science. Either we don't understand what the Torah means, or medical science, what do you think? Just because medical science is adhere to, hopefully we're not done at discovering stuff in the medical science field, because there's still many diseases that need to be cured and many things that need to be dealt with. So hopefully they're continuing to search and search. And a lot of things that are taken for granted today aren't necessarily set in stone. Today, they're acted upon and they're assumed to be the best evidence we have. But to say that this is a contradiction to Torah, we don't need to say that. Today, it doesn't fit with Torah, fine. But again, either you have to learn Torah better, or you just haven't lived long enough to see the medical advancements. I think that's becoming clear.
No, that's good. That's good. That helped.
Okay. Now let's take it to the animal. The Abaya and Rava. You ever heard of the names Abaya and Rava? Two of the most common names in Talmud. I don't know if they argue the most, but from the most common study partners that clashed in halacha.
More famous than Hillel and Shammai?
Well, more famous. Hillel and Shammai are in the Mishnah that earlier, so they're more. They're arguing, they're the first level of the arguments. Abai and Rav are always arguing about Hillel and Shammai. They're later, generations later. They're in the Talmud. Yeah, Amarot. Their teacher was Rabbah. We don't know if that was his name or if that's just what he was called. And there are multiple rabbis in the Gemara. There's rabbis that are identified by their father, Rabbah bar this, Rabbah bar Huna, Rabbah bar Chama, Rabbah bar Chama. There's multiple rabbis, and then there's plain rabbis, more than one. But there was a rabbah that was their teacher. And one day, and they learned by him from when they were really little. And one day, he asked them, "Where's God?" So one of them pointed up, and the other one went outside and pointed up to the sky. So Rabbah said, used the language that the Rebbe used many times and is used very often in Torah literature, in Aramaic, butzin mekatve idea, that when you see something very, very small, you can already see where this is going to go. And he said that they're going to grow up to be, both going to grow up to be big Torah scholars, just by the way they were observing things. And even though they took two different approaches, they would both follow down the path of Torah. And so we just saw how this works in a micro human being. Even in the world itself is micro compared to God, right? So now let's think about the macro. We divided and said that, where is this from? That we have different Power, soul power is in the eyes for sight and in the ears for hearing, etc. Now let's think about the world. The world, we got minerals, and there's, we don't even, I mean, we know, but you can, it's going to take more than a few seconds to list all the types of mineral. Then each mineral in its different forms and different variations. Then you have plant life, right? There's probably millions of different species of plant, things that grow, trees, plants, bushes, whatever goes into that category. Then you have animal life. Again, millions of different species of birds, insects, fish, animals, mammals. Then you have humans. Now, humans is a lot more concentrated, but even humans, we have men and women. We have different, some different variations depending on different country, different ethnicities that do play into what we would call species. Although in humans they're all the same species, different forms, and each person is unique and is individual. Yeah. And then within each person, there's 248 limbs, right? It's further divided and divided. So, and that's just on the Earth. Then you have stars, galaxies, planets. We haven't seen the end of it. Now, if my soul, my single soul, this single computer chip, the single strand of DNA, if that contains potentially the energy to enlive, to energize, and to give life to every part of your body, and what happens when the brain stops functioning, different parts of the body start turning off. Now think about the whole universe. Forget about me as an individual person, which is a miracle in and of itself. Think about all of humanity, now all living things, and all plant life, and all minerals, and that's just this little tiny ball in the middle of this huge universe. If there's a soul that animates us, there's got to be a soul that animates everything. And if everything at one point was nothing, came into existence, that animation happens constantly, right? If you turn on the screen, you have to power it to keep it on. What happens when you pull the power? It turns off, because there isn't something really there. If I'm speaking, I have to constantly speak for you to hear me. If I stop speaking, you don't hear me anymore. So God creates the world out of nothing. So for us, it feels like it's something, but really, this is just like the breath that comes out when I breathe out. But when I inhale, you don't feel any breath coming out, because there isn't any breath coming out. God speaking is like us exhaling, like us speaking. But now there's trillions and infinite, not really infinite because it's physical, but there's almost infinite different things in the world, unique things in the world that need to be animated. So we're going to say that all of these infinite powers that need to come into the individual creations all exist in potential in God, right? God's essence, so to speak. And that's how the world was created. The world was created with 10 utterances, almost like DNA strands or musical notes or the primary colors, 10 utterances. From those 10 utterances, everything came into existence. We're in the second section of Tanya, which I assume maybe we'll start if people want, we can do next. There at the beginning, he explains that through gematrias and through different ways of substituting letters, you get to every Hebrew name, not Hebrew human, every Hebrew name of an object or an animal or a thing in the world. That Hebrew name is found somehow through substitutions and gematrias, or even clearly in those 10 utterances, because that's like the DNA of the universe. Yeah. So let's see here inside, bottom of 790, 25 year. In the bottom of 798, in a truly similar manner, obviously figuratively speaking. So we're saying a truly similar, but remember, we're comparing a human being to God. So let's not get caught up in We're still speaking figuratively. Does the blessed Ein Sof fill all worlds so as to animate them? And in each world there are creatures without limit or end, myriads upon myriads of various grades of angels and souls and so on. Because what I just described to you is only the physical world. Even the whole universe is still the physical universe. Then there are spiritual universes, spiritual realities. Wait. Oh. And in each world there are creatures, and so too is the abundance of the worlds without end or limit, one higher than the other, and so on. Yeah, really, even though we speak of four general worlds, really that's just four categories of worlds. But really, there's infinite levels going higher and higher. Every single facet of creation has a purpose and therefore has some intention of God in it. Now, could you say that God is made up of all of these trillions of pieces that are found within? That's silly. But God is intentionally in each and everything. The famous Medrash, King David, we probably spoke of one, I don't know if it's different Medrashes or different, but King David asked God why he created us. He figured God created everything, so there must be a reason. Why did God create a spider? What purpose is there for a spider? You know the story? So God said, don't worry, one day you'll see. And when he was running away from Saul, from his father-in-law who was trying to kill him, don't try that at home, he hid in a cave, and a spider came and formed a web on the entrance of the cave. And when Saul passed the entrance of the cave, he saw the spider web, and he figured David can't be in here because he would have broken the web to get inside. So the fresh web concealed David's hiding place. That's one story the Medrash says. But then, based on a verse in Psalms, actually, we say it on Shabbos. Psalm 34. It says, right? The David bishanoso estam ne Avimelech. Yeah, David changed his reason when his reasoning changed in front of Avimelech. What's that talking about?
He feigned insanity.
He feigned insanity when he was running away from Saul. He ended up in the Philistine by Goliath's brother. King David killed Goliath. So now he ends up with his brother, and the Philistines recognize him, and they come to the king and they say, your brother's killer is here. And now King David is stuck. So King David feigned insanity before Avimelech. While he was praying to God to save him, he got this idea. Well, it's not easy to feign insanity. Try it, you'll see. Most psychiatrists can read through it, but some people can be pretty good at it. And King David somehow got the inspiration and got the ability to feign insanity. And when the king saw him, the king said, I don't need more, I have enough Meshagoyim here, I don't need another one. And let him live in peace and didn't kill him. So King David asked God, why did you create insanity? What does God need insane people for? It seems like a bug in creation. Why did God create it? God said, don't worry, one day you'll figure it out. And King David said, one day I figured it out. I figured out when insanity came. Now, does that mean that every person that's insane serves that purpose? No, but every person that's insane has a purpose. Just like I have a purpose, someone who's handicapped and can't see or can't walk or can't talk or can't think or can't feel or can't. Every human being has a purpose. Every creation has a purpose. Every idea has a purpose. Even the concept of insanity has a purpose, even if it wasn't practiced. Even if we manage to get rid of insanity, somehow we cure it, just the concept of insanity exists for a reason because God wanted it to exist. Yeah. So everything exists for a reason. But are we going to say that there's a part of God that's insane, or that specializes in insanity, looks like insanity, and that's the part of God? Obviously not. Just like the soul, if you look at the soul itself, you're not going to see different colors or different gradations or variations, different levels. The soul itself is one pure entity. But the potential in the soul, and the same thing with God, even though God is God, there is no color or shape or musical tune, anything in God, but there is infinite potential for everything. And this I don't want to get caught up in this, although I'm going to feel compelled to mention it throughout the next couple chapters. But I want to tell you right now, I probably will stop myself every time. This is very philosophically discussed amongst Jewish philosophers, Kabbalists for generations, and is explained at great or discussed at great length in Hasidus. How exactly does this work? Are we saying that so the DNA, for example, you could find the root of a beard here or toenails in the DNA, right? Even though if you look at the DNA, you don't see toenails or brain cells, but if you know what toenails and brain cells are, you could find their root in the DNA. So, okay, God doesn't include toenails and brain cells, but if brain cells and toenails come from God, does that mean that there is already some sort of potential in God? There is something forming? We're going to use that language here, that God himself has in potential. However, in most places in Kabbalah and Chassidus, it's explained that when we say God himself here, we're not talking about God himself. We're talking about the essence of the ray of light that God gives off, that shines from him. When we talk about God himself, we can't talk about it. There's no way to define it. There's no way to name it. Anything you say about it or don't say about it is already a limiting factor. Regardless of how positive you think you're being, it's a limiting factor. So any term we use, even when we say essence, even when we say God himself, is only the God himself that the part of God that he allows to come in contact with us, that we can even not communicate, we can even think about. Okay, so when we say God's infinite, like the Ein Sof, a lot of times Hasidus will say the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, because when we say the infinite, if it's God himself, God isn't infinite. God isn't, because infinite means he's not finite. That's limiting God. So God himself isn't infinite. God himself isn't himself and not his light, because that's also limiting. Again, you can use the best word you can come up with to describe God himself, and you'll always be limiting God. In Yiddish, the word that was chosen to reflect Hashem is der Oibishter. The Oibishter means the higher one. Now, in human terms, usually when you think higher, lower, you think in space. But obviously, spiritually, higher, lower doesn't mean space, right? A higher grade isn't literally higher on the table. If you have a stack of tests, the tests with the higher grades aren't higher physically than the lower grades, right? You can have a higher grade that's lower. Higher means it performed better. It's more advanced, yeah? It's higher in that way. So when I got caught up in the metaphor that
What about using higher power?
so we say Oiberster, we say the higher one. We don't mean he's up there in the heavens. We mean whatever you'll say is bigger than that, better than that, whatever you want, more than that. There is no, so it's a descriptor, but it's not describing it in a positive way. It's describing it in a negative. It's not, whatever you say, it's not this, it's something else. Okay, no matter what you can come up with, Hashem is something different. Because if you came up with it and you could think it and you can imagine it, that's already a limiting factor, and that's not him. So it's probably the best expression that we have in one word terms. Again, it's not describing anything. It's describing, but even describing not is also a limiting factor. Because we're saying he's not this. Why not? God can't be found in the limited image that you came up with in your head. Right? God is there too. So even Eibishter is also a little limiting, because we're saying he's more than that. No, he's here too. He's also more, but he's not just more than that. So there is nothing. So anytime you're going to see in the next chapters, really anytime you learn Hasidus, and you're going to see, now, sometimes, very rarely, and mainly in the Rebbe's talks, but rarely, once in a while, you'll see where it speaks about the essence of Hashem. And there it's really referring to God. And you'll see in the context, you'll see that all of the explanatory terms that are used, and then it says, but Hashem's essence is higher than that. Okay, there it may be referring to Hashem himself. Again, we have no other way of referring to it except essence, so we use that term, but we don't mean essence the way we're using it here. When we use the term essence here, we're talking about the essence of the light. The essence of God, there is no essence versus something else, God himself. It's one thing. It's not one. It's not, there's no numbers. So it's not essence versus. But so again, I probably won't keep on mentioning it, but in case I do or in case I don't, just to keep in mind that when we use the term essence, generally speaking, if you think God is greater than that, he is. We're just talking about the essence of the light, the way he gave us the ability to somehow have a relationship with, interact with. Even if we can't understand it, we can at least imagine it or think about it in some way, shape, or form, because he gave us descriptions in the Torah.
Would emanation be any better? Because
emanation, it's all the same thing, but still.
Emanation essence.
But when we say essence, we're saying the essence of the emanation.
Okay.
Because if we're using essence to describe it as being essence, then we're talking about the light. We're not talking about God himself. Because if we're saying this, not that, essence, not emanation, that can't be God. That's only a ray of God that's this and not that. Or that God can make it seem as if it's this and not that. Okay, so in the middle of 799, yeah, like a few lines after 25 ER. If we have to start again from there, we'll start again from there next week. We'll finish the chapter next week, by the way.
Yeah.
Questions, comments?